The Poor Clares, as they were to be called later, came to the Philippines from Spain in 1621. In fact, they were the very first to establish a contemplative community and religious order for women in all of Asia and the Far East. Bolinao, Pangasinan. On the 24th of July, 1621, its distant shores appeared before the weary eyes of 9 Poor Clare sisters, the end of a long journey over land and sea, at a time when conditions of travel were unspeakable. Ill, having lost one sister to the brutal voyage, the remaining 9 were said to have boarded the native Caritela, and, it is speculated, went to the church of St. James the Great in thanksgiving for the journey that had at last been completed. These were no ordinary women, for they had as their abbess Mother Geronima de la Asuncion, known throughout her native Spain as a living saint, La Santa Monja de Toledo, the saint of the city of Toledo. This virtuous woman had entered the monastery de Santa Isabel at the age of 15, and upon receiving the habit, renounced her wealthy, sheltered life and changed her noble family name of Yañez de la Fuente to that of de la Asuncion. She had embraced her religious life with such intensity and led an exceptional life of prayer and penance that it could not escape notice. She strove to be nothing in the world, and even resorted to standing with her arms outstretched in the manner of the crucifixion for long hours under the sun, deliberately burning her skin severely in order to detract from her physical beauty. Though enclosed within the cloisters, her virtue was such that even her great humility could not hide it, and word of her holiness spread beyond the grilled windows of the monastery to the entire countryside. Blessed with mystical experiences of the Passion and various manifestations from the Blessed Virgin, she gave herself so generously to the service of others, both inside and outside the convent, that it soon became known that she had the gifts of healing and prophecy. But few knew that this humble and obedient soul suffered all her life, not just from physical bouts with all types of illness, but also from long periods of spiritual aridity and a life often totally devoid of spiritual consolation. Yet her compassion was such that she gave away her bed and personal effects to the sick and the poor, and her interior life had developed to such a high level that those around her could not perceive the constant mortification that she had submitted her physical self to. It was to this woman that Dominican and Franciscan friars first expressed the wish of the city of Manila for a monastery of praying nuns. Her missionary zeal inflamed, her prayers directed toward this remote archipelago in the Far East, she had to wait 22 long years before this dream could be realized. For among other difficulties, the King of Spain himself said that such an exemplary woman should not be allowed to leave Spain. But finally, in 1620, at the age of 65, with the permission of King Felipe III, this frail, sickly woman and a handful of sisters set out on their mission. She had been so popular that crowds were on hand for this occasion, and the entire city mourned her departure. They were to proceed to Manila from Toledo via Mexico, a route that entailed crossing rugged terrain in coaches, mules, or on foot, a route that took them over the Atlantic and the vast Pacific. and at every step of the way her fame preceded her, and the impact of her intense spirituality was felt everywhere. The only way across the seas at the time was the galleon. Primarily geared for conquest, exploration, and trade, it was particularly ill-suited to passengers, not to mention women and contemplative nuns at that. A late 16th century chronicler likened the galleon to a prison from which there was no escape, citing the limited space, the heat, the lack of fresh air, the presence of fleas, lice, and seawater, and the terrible stench under the decks. Parching thirst and spells of vomiting were a passenger's daily lot, and the journey, harsh and long, was enough to break a man's health for life. Moreover, there was the threat of storms, epidemics, and pirates. One would do well, the chronicler continues, to confess and receive communion before such a trip, for to ride the galleon was to court death. Only those driven by gold or religion would dare such a journey. It is against these conditions that one must measure Mother Geronima's courage and faith. For not only did she survive the trip, she was said to have maintained her intense life of prayer and penance even in these conditions, even as she suffered from high fever. So faithful was she to the vow of enclosure that she did not once look out at the passing scenery. Indeed, she had not even glanced at her parents' home when she passed it upon leaving Toledo. Madre Geronima's group arrived in the city of Intramuros on the 5th of August, after a journey lasting 1 year, 3 months, and 9 days. Setting up a new monastery in a foreign land was not easy. She met with resistance from some of the local population who claimed her convent was depriving men of marriageable ladies. Her openness to native vocations also came under fire. Moreover, she encountered opposition from one Franciscan provincial who sought her removal as abbess and who maintained that due to Manila's unstable economy, the Clares' observance of poverty be mitigated by admitting rentals, demanding dowries, and employing domestic help. But Jeronima's tenacity and the support of her lawful superior, the Franciscan Minister General in Spain, won her the right to practice the privilege of poverty and the rule as Clare had originally envisioned it. Thus, during her lifetime, the first community at Intramuros lived entirely supported by alms, and the monastery went on to become an integral part of Filipino life. Madre Geronima's holiness became well known in Intramuros as in Toledo, and when she died on the 22nd of October 1630, at the age of 75, thousands came, and her wake had to be extended and her body exposed to the public. Manila and the Manileños mourn the loss of a great saint. Her confessor, Father Gines Quesada, writes movingly of her last hours, of the wasted figure lying on a poor mat, covered by an old blanket, with a piece of wood for a pillow, who in her extreme pain had refused to remove even her habit or her veil, and who, feeling death to be near, had asked that she be laid on the floor, on a cross of ashes, in acknowledgement of her littleness before her Creator, who had breathed life into the merest dust. He writes,
She confessed with brevity, making a general confession with the promptness of a great but humble soul. By that general confession I was convinced of the cleanliness of her soul, and I doubted whether there was any matter for absolution at all. I gave 1,000 thanks to God for having brought me from 5,000 leagues away to know and communicate personally with this exquisite soul that has belonged only to God.